Ned Kelly's story, often told in the context of his criminal activities, begins long before his infamy. Born in 1854 in the harsh environment of colonial Australia, Ned was the second eldest son of Irish immigrants, John and Ellen Kelly. His father, John, had been convicted of stealing 2 pigs in Ireland and sent to the penal colony. Ned's early life was shaped by the trials and struggles of a family born into poverty and oppression. His father's death, when Ned was only 12, set the stage for a series of hardships that would follow. With no paternal figure to guide them, the Kelly family fell deeper into hardship, and the young Ned was forced to mature quickly. Though his youth was not without moments of joy, the reality of colonial life for the Irish immigrants was harsh. It was a time of great injustice, especially for those from the lower classes, and the Kellys were often victims of discrimination and mistreatment by the colonial authorities. Many locals viewed them with suspicion, not only because of their Irish roots, but because of their poverty and perceived rebellion. Ned Kelly, however, seemed to inherit a certain defiant spirit from his father. By the time he was a teenager, his experiences with the law had begun. Arrested for assaulting a Chinese man when he was just 15, this marked the beginning of his criminal career. Though the specifics of the encounter were unclear, it would be a pivotal moment in his life, setting him on a path of rebellion that would forever alter his legacy. It wasn't long before Ned found himself entangled in further run-ins with the law. At 16, he was sentenced to a brief period in prison for an attempted crime, and shortly after, he found himself in a corrupt police system that targeted him and his family. The Kellys were accused of various crimes, and there was a constant push from the authorities to break them. The Kelly family's hardships were compounded by the corrupt police officers who often used their power for personal gain and to maintain control over the disenfranchised. These injustices were a formative influence on young Ned. As he watched the police manipulate the law and exploit the people of the land, his disdain for authority began to grow, eventually becoming one of the driving forces in his fight. By 1878, Kelly's involvement with crime escalated when Constable Fitzpatrick, a notorious and corrupt officer, accused Kelly's brother Dan of crime that he did not commit. When Fitzpatrick arrived at the Kelly house, he was confronted by Ned, who, enraged by the false accusation, allegedly assaulted the officer. The incident set off a series of events that would change the course of Kelly's life. Fearing retribution from the police, Ned and his family went into hiding, marking the beginning of his fugitive status. In the wake of this altercation, the police sought to capture him, but it was not until the tragic death of Constable Fitzpatrick, which occurred under unclear circumstances, that the Kelly family became the primary target of the law. It was during this period of evasion that Ned Kelly, now seen by many as a fugitive, began to form a band of loyal men. These men, who would become known as the Kelly Gang, included Ned's brother Dan, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. These were not common criminals. Rather, they were men who, like Kelly, had suffered under the colonial system. Each of them had personal grievances against the authorities and shared a desire for justice. Their bond was not only forged through mutual respect, but also by their shared history of oppression. Together, they embarked on a campaign of rebellion, targeting the banks and police stations of the colonial system, robbing from the wealthy and corrupt, while often sparing the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Kelly's reasoning was simple. They were striking back an unjust system that had tormented his family for years. Their criminal exploits quickly earned them notoriety, and the Kelly Gang's name spread far and wide across Victoria. The British authorities were desperate to capture them, offering a hefty reward for their capture. As the Kelly Gang continued their campaign, they began to take on the characteristics of folk heroes. The media, particularly the press, turned Kelly into a figurehead for resistance against the British Empire, painting him as a man of the people. Despite his criminal activities, many saw him as a champion of the oppressed, fighting against an unjust colonial regime that sought to subjugate the working class and the Irish immigrants to the settlers and the poor in rural Victoria. Kelly was not simply a criminal, but a man of courage and conviction, willing to stand up for the weak. By 1879, the Kelly Gang had already become infamous, and their attacks on local banks and police stations left many questioning the legitimacy of the colonial authorities. Kelly's actions were not reckless. Each move was carefully planned, often with the support of the local population. His gang would execute a robbery, and instead of taking every penny, they would often redistribute wealth to those in need. Kelly became a symbol of defiance, challenging the systemic injustices that he felt had been imposed upon the working class. One of the most daring acts of the Kelly gang occurred in the town of Euroa in 1878, where they took control of the local bank. Holding the townspeople hostage, they executed their heist with precision. But what made it memorable was Kelly's interaction with the local people. While robbing the bank, Kelly was seen talking to the townsfolk, assuring them that they would not be harmed. The Euroa robbery cemented Kelly's place in Australian history and also sparked a series of events that led to further actions by the police to capture him. The authorities were now determined to end his rebellion, and the hunt for the Kelly gang intensified. The police, with their increased resources, began to tighten their net around the gang, using informants and spying tactics to locate their hideouts. Despite the constant pressure, Kelly and his gang remained elusive, vanishing into the dense forests and mountains of Victoria after each robbery. But as the pressure mounted, so did the desperation of the Kelly gang. In 1879, the gang would strike again, this time in Jerilderie. The robbery, which took place in February, was not only about money, but also about sending a message. Kelly, ever the strategist, took the time to write a letter to the authorities, outlining his grievances and accusing them of corruption and abuse. The letter, which became known as Kelly's Jerilderie letter, was a bold manifesto, a declaration of the reasons behind his rebellion. It outlined how the authorities, particularly the police, had harassed his family, stolen from the poor, and supported the oppressive system that kept the working class in poverty. Kelly's words resonated with many, and the letter was seen as a call for justice, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced by the powers that be. Despite the growing public support, Kelly's activities were becoming more dangerous. In 1880, the gang's luck began to run out. A local informant had tipped off the police, and the Kelly gang found themselves surrounded in the small town of Glenrowan. The gang had planned to derail a train carrying a group of police officers, but the plan was thwarted when the police got wind of their scheme. The town was soon under siege, and the Kelly gang had nowhere to run. In the early morning hours of June 29, 1880, a fierce shootout erupted between the Kelly gang and the police, which would become the most famous and tragic chapter of Kelly's story. At Glenrowan, Kelly and his gang were outfitted with suits of homemade armor, which they had crafted out of iron and steel. This armor, though crude, offered protection against the police's bullets, allowing the gang to withstand the initial onslaught. The battle that ensued was chaotic, with police officers and Kelly's gang exchanging gunfire from behind trees, buildings, and makeshift barricades. Despite their best efforts, the gang was outnumbered, and as the day wore on, the battle began to take its toll. Kelly, now badly wounded, was eventually captured, his armor dented and his resolve unbroken. The capture of Ned Kelly marked the end of the Kelly gang's rebellion, but it also signified the beginning of his transformation into a national symbol. The story of the Glenrowan standoff, with its dramatic imagery of Kelly standing defiantly in his armor, would go down in history as one of the defining moments in Australia's struggle against colonial oppression. Though he had been captured and was facing certain death, Kelly's spirit had not been broken. Kelly's trial was swift and relentless. He was charged with murder and robbery, and despite his defiant stance in court, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Throughout the trial, Kelly maintained his belief that he had been wronged by the authorities, and he offered no apology for his actions. He was a man who had fought not just for survival but for a sense of justice, however flawed his methods might have been. On November 11, 1880, Ned Kelly was hanged at the old Melbourne jail. Ned Kelly's execution was met with a mix of grief, anger, and defiance. Many Australians mourned his death, not as a criminal, but as a martyr who had fought against an unjust system. Over time, his image evolved from that of a mere outlaw to a symbol of resistance and national pride. The Kelly legend was born, and with it, a new understanding of what it meant to be an Australian hero. Years after his death, the legacy of Ned Kelly only grew stronger. Songs, books, and films immortalized his story, and monuments were erected in his honor. Whether viewed as a criminal or a hero, Ned Kelly's legacy remained a powerful and enduring part of Australian folklore. His story speaks to the universal themes of resistance against injustice and a desire for freedom. And while his actions remain controversial, His place in the history of Australia is undeniable. The tale of Ned Kelly, a man who stood against the might of an oppressive colonial system, continues to inspire generations, ensuring that his name will live on forever